Prologue, Tears that brings no joy. That year, autumn came too soon. The wind tore green leaves from the trees and scattered them across the damp paths. The air carried a chill from the sea, sharper than usual. Yet Rhoswen did not sink into melancholy. Not entirely, at least. During the day, her children played in the yard. Kayla taught her simple doll how to behave like a princess. Torrin climbed the apple tree, and Gilmar gathered stones, twigs, and nutshells. Rhoswen often laughed then, quietly, to herself, even if a shadow of worry already lingered in her heart. For her husband had been gone too long. He should have been home by now. She waited for him, imagined him returning muddy and weary but smiling. Each evening when the children were asleep, she would sit on the wooden chair before the house. Once, she always wore her orange gown, brushing her fiery red hair as she waited for her husband. But the gown had grown a little tight, the fabric settling differently on her fuller hips than it once had. She still adored it. Once, it had made her feel beautiful. And then one day, he truly returned. Not as she remembered him, not on horseback, not with his head held high. He came by wagon, bandaged and pale. Gilmar was the first to run screaming from the house, tripped in the mud, and came back covered in it. Kayla and Torrin ran out after him. Rhoswen approached slowly. She saw her husband clumsily climb down from the cart. How he held his left hand close to his body, and his right. There was nothing left of his right hand but a stump. "That's stupid," he said with a nervous smile. "Best you had not seen the other guy." She looked at him, at the stump, at the hard, weary face, and for the first time fear clutched her heart with a force she had never known before, a fear that would stay with her for a long, long time. She thought he would stay now. That having lost his hand, at least he would no longer have to go back there. But he was only to remain a few days. The days passed quickly. Each morning they ate breakfast together. Then the chores, until evening, when she could sit beside her husband. She would sit by him and stroke his uninjured hand. They did not speak of his next departure. She feared it and wanted no words of it. Feared she might never see him again. And she would remain here, with the children, with the farmhand, with the young maid who still had much to learn, with a house that was growing cold. She feared, too, that soon she would no longer fit into her orange dress at all. She could feel, slowly, her carefree life slipping away. She told no one of this. But when her husband rode off again, each evening she brushed her hair before the house, hoping he would soon return. Before he left, her husband had given her something. She did not yet know she would soon have a great belly once more. Too great to wear her beloved orange gown. One day a letter came from her husband. The situation was turning grim, and he wished to send them to the capital. He wrote that it would be safer there. They were to live with his cousin. Rhoswen gathered the children, the farmhand, the young maid, and what precious belongings they had. They set out in a large cart drawn by 4 horses. They reached the capital, where they spent the winter. The city was teeming with folk just like them. Petty nobility displaced from their homes. Manor houses became battlegrounds, changed hands, and their owners fled with their families. Winter thinned her coin pouch, and spring brought the great belly. It also brought rumors, then news, then grim certainty. The war was already lost. Enemy armies pushed deeper into the country. Her husband rode again. He was guarding the princess, safe now, no longer at the front. He bade Rhoswen travel further east. She did not think yet of war. She rejoiced that her husband was alive. She gathered the children, the farmhand, the maid, and what remained of their belongings. In truth, she was glad to leave. A long winter beneath one roof with her cousin had been no joy. This time they traveled with a smaller wagon, drawn by a single horse. By early summer, they had to stop again. The belly was too heavy for further travel. The inn at the foot of the eastern mountains looked as though it hadn't gained a single new plank in years. The roof sagged beneath its own weight, caked in dust and scraps of birds' nests. In the yard, an old cart creaked miserably, and the air reeked of sour milk and moldy straw. Rhoswen sat on the threshold of the room, heavy, sweating, sore. The babe slept at her breast, curled beneath a dirty scrap of linen. "Felmir," she whispered with quiet longing. Her husband's father's name. She knew she ought not name the child on her own. But she did not know when next she would see her husband. If ever. Nearby, Kayla was trying once more to draw the bowstring, her tongue pressed to her lip, her brows furrowed in childish determination. The arrow quivered, but the girl kept trying. Torrin tried too, but with far less success. The farmhand corrected the girl's grip with a firm, sure hand. Gentler, but steady. The arrow whistled and struck a cracked beam of the fence. Well done, again. Rhoswen smiled to herself. When the woman returned to herself, they began preparing for the road ahead. Supplies were bought at the inn. The wagon was harnessed, the children fed, the babe asleep. North, she said to herself, smoothing her dress. It wasn't until they were on the road that the woman realized she had been cheated. Instead of a sack of flour, she had been sold moldy grain. Rhoswen pressed her lips tight. They were too far to turn back now. The road north was empty, strangely quiet. Their wagon creaked along slowly, the horse plodding dully. Fewer and fewer people crossed their path. And those they did meet looked much like themselves, thin, wary, strangers fleeing in opposite directions. On the third day, men in filthy armor, the heraldry scraped from their shields, stopped them. Turn back! The crossings burned. South's the only way through. There was no negotiation. The soldier spat and pointed the way with the tip of his blade. That night at camp, Rhoswen sat leaning against the wagon wheel. In her hands, she held the babe's gown, trying to stitch the torn sleeve with frayed thread. Her belly ached, her arms ached, her thoughts were like water in a puddle, murky, heavy. South again, she said, not to anyone, to herself. In the south, the rumors of bandits proved true. They appeared suddenly, surrounded them during a stop, quickly bound the farmhand. They fancied the maid, and Rhoswen too. The mother was glad, at least, they spared her daughter. The bandits weren't gentle. When they were done, they left. Took everything of value, didn't ask, simply ordered them to hand it over. The last of their coins, the horse, the young maid who had caught their eye, they took her too. Rhoswen could do nothing. She stood clutching the children, watching as they rode off with what mattered most. At least they had not harmed the farmhand. She feared to admit it even to herself, but all she thought of then was the horse, that without it, they could go no further. She did not cry. Inside, she felt hollow, as if something more had been torn from her, something she would never get back. Shame only came later. They had to push the wagon onward. Each step grew harder. She gasped, cursed beneath her breath. Every step was a humiliation. They had to throw things by the roadside to lighten the load, first useless tools, then pots, in the end chests. Chests full of things which in spring had seemed so necessary to live. With everything she cast away, she grew leaner. Something inside her was dying too. That day, the farmhands spotted a deer. They halted the cart to try their luck at hunting it. He and Kayla crept into the thicket. At a signal, they both loosed their arrows. The man's arrow struck true. He stepped forward to end the creature's suffering quickly. Just as he was sheathing his knife, a dog burst from the undergrowth, a starved, feral mutt. It sank its teeth into his leg and started to tear. With a swift move, the farmhand cut it down with his blade. The wound did not seem grave. The teeth had barely broken the skin. The deer was small enough that he slung it over his shoulders with ease. They carried it back to the cart, where Rhoswen was already waiting by the fire. There'll be meat, he said, proudly showing off his prize. Rhoswen smiled at him. Together with Torin, they set to work dressing the animal. The next day they set off, but the cart would not budge. Laden with meat, it was heavier, but not so much as to cause this. Rhoswen noticed the farmhand was limping. They stopped. She wanted to see to his leg. The dog, he muttered. Rhoswen had a bad feeling at once. She sent the children for water. She washed and dressed the wound. They did not travel any further that day. The next day was worse. They covered barely 2 leagues. They had to make a longer halt. The wound would not heal. Each morning more foul-smelling pus seeped from it. At night, Rhoswen heard his groans, muffled, ashamed. The farmhand did not want to show weakness before the children. Gilmar fell asleep clutching his brother's arm. Torin tossed restlessly, whispering in his sleep. Kayla pretended not to hear, and she sat by the fire. The deer meat began to spoil quickly. With each passing day, it grew more vile. During the day, they had to leave the farmhand with the youngest too. They went out in search of food. They gathered berries, cracked open logs for fat grubs, pulled roots from the earth. Kayla tried her hand at hunting. It wasn't easy to find anything to eat. Yet one day, they succeeded. Kayla had caught a rabbit. She squeezed its little head and carefully drew the arrow from its thin body with the other hand. The creature was small, near starved like them. The girl looked at her mother with quiet, almost shy pride. Well done, Rhoswen nodded. Well done, Kayla. She hung the rabbit by its feet on the string at her belt. Torin tucked a handful of dried berries into the pouch he carried. At the bottom of the sack lay fat grubs, which they had together pulled from rotting wood. The way back to camp was short, yet that day it seemed strangely silent. Rhoswen walked faster and faster, her breath quickening. On the horizon, the bare treetops swayed. The ground was strewn with gray leaves, and among them tangled the footprints they had left in recent days. Before she saw the camp, she heard crying, a sharp, ragged, desperate wail of an infant. Rhoswen quickened her pace. A bad feeling gnawed at her. Kayla and Torin rushed after her. Gilmar sat on the ground shaking, his brother on his lap. Little Falmir was red-faced from crying, his mouth open wide like a wound. Gilmar rocked him awkwardly in his arms, but the child would not quiet. Beside them, on a filthy blanket, lay the farmhand. Rhoswen stopped short, mid-step. Something caught in her throat. The farmhand's eyes were closed. His face pale as a wall, his arms stretched out clumsily, unnaturally, as if he no longer knew what to do with them. The mother knelt slowly beside the body. She touched his shoulder. Cold. "He didn't get up?" she asked hoarsely. Gilmar shook his head. "No, he wouldn't drink," he whispered. Then he slept. Just slept. Rhoswen pressed her hands to her face, quietly. She did not cry. She simply breathed deep, slower and slower, until her breath became silence. Without a word, Kayla set to skinning the rabbit. The next day, they did not light a fire. They did not bury the farmhand. They had no tools to dig, no strength. They took only what was necessary, some meat, a few dry branches, a water skin. They left the cart behind. The woman left her last good dress, the orange one, embroidered at the cuffs. A year ago, it had been her pride, worn to every feast. Now it lay carelessly tossed atop the cart. Rhoswen looked at it only once, then turned and walked into the forest. She said nothing. She felt nothing. In the days that followed, it grew colder. The woman longed to be further away already. Watching the land from a hill, she thought perhaps they could take a shortcut. She wanted badly to leave this wasteland behind. They descended into the woods, every tree the same. They began to lose their way. 3 days they wandered beneath the canopy. It grew colder still. She knew frost would come soon. She feared everything. Hunger, cold, people, beasts, her own children. She felt she had failed them. At night, she dreamed of her husband, begging for help. On the 4th day, they found a dugout. Small, dark, reeking. They spent the night there. By morning, snow had fallen. It fell all day. They stayed. Only there, in that dugout, did she come to know true hunger. She baked bread from bark and old acorns. Foul stuff that gave the children the runs. But they lived. When the weather cleared, Kayla and Torin went hunting. They returned with a pheasant. Rhoswen cherished every morsel of meat like treasure. She dried it, froze it, rationed it. She knew days would come when that meat would be everything. By the fire at night, her thoughts turned more and more to the war, to the king and his kin. She thought of the princess her husband now guarded, who had taken him away when she needed him most. "If I ever met her," she whispered in the dark, "I'd claw out her eyes." One winter's night, Gilmar passed. Rhoswen fell into madness. She tried to feed him scraps of dried meat. Only the cries of her remaining children brought her back to herself. Torin wept bitterly that day. Something inside her broke then. She looked at her children and wondered which she would have to bury next. She waited, felt neither fear nor hunger. Kayla and Torin dragged Gilmar's body from the dugout and covered it with branches and snow. The frozen earth would not yield to digging. After a week, she came back to herself. She regretted leaving. She could have stayed. Death by sword would have been swifter, surely less painful. Fear returned. She feared her children hated her. Many days passed before Rhoswen could bury her son. She did it properly. As she dug, she thought of the farmhand they had left behind. She felt no guilt, but she knew punishment would find her. At last, spring came. It was easier to find food. Torin began bringing back eggs. He climbed trees and stole them from nests. They began speaking of the road ahead, but not for long. One day, Torin fell from a tree, broke his leg. Rhoswen remembered the farmhand's story, dead from a leg wound. She could not accept. This wound was different. Her thoughts turned only to hunger, to winter, and that if they stayed, they would all die. She wondered if she should leave her son behind. Sacrifice one child to save the other two. She could not. They stayed. They waited. The leg healed poorly. Rhoswen watched her children. Kayla was 13 now, a woman grown. Once so joyful, so girlish, now silent and gaunt. The burden had fallen most on her. It was she who hunted, who had to tear her mother from the claws of despair time and again. She never wept, never complained. Torin did what he could, but walking was hard for him. He limped badly. He could not hunt. He gathered berries and grubs, brought back kindling, helped however he was able. Little Falmir grew very slowly, far slower than the others had. That he lived so long was a miracle, as was the fact she still had milk to feed him. She knew what awaited them, knew she would bury them all, one by one. At night she cursed the royal family. Let them all be damned, especially that harlot Miriel. she hissed into the dark.